A single ticket to a midsummer tennis tournament in Washington, D.C., used to cost $28. This year, according to tournament figures, the average session ticket climbed to around $143. On the resale market, prices reportedly started near $65 for early rounds and climbed toward $289 for the marquee session. That's not inflation. That's a market repricing itself in real time, in a matter of months, around a single name. And weeks before a single ball was struck, before Venus Williams or Naomi Osaka or Iga Swiatek ever set foot on court, this tournament had already become one of the hottest tickets of the summer. So what happened? What turned a solid, respected but rarely sold-out American hardcourt event into a genuine phenomenon? The kind of story that spills out of the sports pages and into ordinary conversation. The answer, in 3 words, is a 21-year-old from the Philippines named Alex Eala. By the time the tournament actually began, the grandstands were reportedly packed with Filipino flags, the hashtags were trending across time zones, and some of the biggest names in the sport found themselves sharing the spotlight with a player who, just 2 years earlier, was barely inside the world's top 140. This is the story of how that happened, and what it says about where her career, and the sport around her, might be headed next. To understand how strange this is, you have to understand what the Mubadala DC Open actually is. Historically known as the City Open, it's the only tournament in the world that combines an ATP 500 and a WTA 500 event on the same site, in the same week, a genuine mark of prestige on the tennis calendar, and not the kind of event that usually needs a single player to sell itself. Washington has real tennis roots, too. Organizers point to a streak of consecutive sold-out sessions stretching back to 2019, so this isn't the city discovering the sport for the first time, and it isn't a case of a struggling event suddenly finding an audience out of nowhere. This was already a healthy market, but 2026 was different. Reportedly, around 75% of the tournament had already sold through package renewals before single-session tickets even went on sale, before the general public had a real chance to buy in at all, and later figures suggested the event climbed toward roughly 97% capacity overall. Then came the pricing story. Those single-session tickets that once opened around $28 averaged near $143, while resale listings ran from about $65 up toward $289 for the sessions everyone wanted most. Organizers walked into this tournament expecting a solid year, the kind they'd grown used to since 2019. What they got, by most accounts, was something they'd never seen before. A demand curve that didn't behave the way a midsummer hardcourt event was supposed to behave. So who is Alex Eala, and how did one player move a market like this? She's 21 years old, from the Philippines, and she's in the middle of the best stretch of tennis she's ever played. Her rise didn't start this year, and it didn't start with one lucky run. It's been building, quietly at first, for years. Back in 2022, she won the US Open Junior Championship as the 10th seed, working her way through 3 higher-seeded players without dropping a set, before beating the number 2 seed, Lucy Havlikova, in the final. She spoke afterward about what it meant to represent the Philippines on that stage, a country with a long tennis tradition but few players who'd ever reached that particular spotlight. That title made her the first player from the Philippines to win multiple junior Grand Slam championships, having already claimed doubles titles at the 2020 Australian Open and the 2021 French Open. Long before Washington, long before ticket prices became the story, she was already writing history for her country, one tournament at a time, mostly outside the notice of casual fans. Some of that foundation was built far from home, in ways that shaped both her game and her outlook. At 13, she and her brother moved to Manacor, Spain, to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy, a place she'd later call home for 7 years, the years that took her from a promising junior into a genuine professional. She graduated in 2023 with Nadal himself presenting her diploma, and Iga Swiatek delivering the graduation address. At the time, it was simply a nice detail, 2 respected champions honoring a promising teenager. It's only in hindsight, given what came next, that it reads like a strange bit of foreshadowing. The breakout arrived in 2025, at the Miami Open, and it arrived fast. Eala entered as world number 140 on a wild card and reached the semifinals, beating 3 seeded players along the way, including reigning Australian Open champion Madison Keys and world number 2 Iga Swiatek, before falling to Jessica Pegula. That run made her the first Filipina player to beat a WTA top 10 opponent, and a top 5 opponent, since WTA rankings began in 1975, a fact that puts the scale of that week into perspective. It also made her the first player from the Philippines to reach a WTA Tour-level semifinal, period. Off the back of that single tournament, she jumped from number 140 to number 72 in the world. In tennis terms, that's not a steady climb. That's a player announcing herself. The momentum didn't stop there, either. If anything, it kept compounding. Moving into 2026, she reportedly captured the title at the Birmingham Classic, reached the semifinals at the Berlin Open, and became the first Filipino player in the Open era to reach the second week of a Grand Slam singles main draw. Somewhere in that stretch came a headline win, reportedly over defending Wimbledon champion Iga Swiatek on center court, A result that, if it lands the way it's being described, turns the graduation speech from years earlier into one of the more poetic footnotes in modern tennis. The student, on the sport's biggest stage, beating the very champion who once spoke at her graduation. Around the same time, she reportedly won the WTA's Grasscourt fan vote with close to 89% of the vote. A number that says less about one poll and more about how quickly fans, not just results, were falling in behind her. And here's the thing, Washington wasn't a one-off. It wasn't a single city catching a moment of hype. It was the loudest chapter yet in a pattern that had been building all season, city by city, tournament by tournament. At the Dubai Duty-Free Tennis Championships, organizers reportedly saw a significant jump in ticket sales compared to the year before, and much of that surge got credited directly to her presence. Phone lines, by some accounts, flooded with inquiries the moment her name appeared in the draw. At the Australian Open, fans reportedly lined up before her matches only to be turned away once the assigned court hit capacity. The former Philippine national coach, Carl Santamaria, suggested the crowd she drew could have filled a stadium far larger than the one she'd actually been given, a detail that hints at organizers underestimating her draw before they learned better. Back home, interest in the Philippine Women's Open reportedly surged before her participation was even officially confirmed, fans buying tickets on the possibility alone. And the sport's biggest names started saying so out loud, even if their exact words vary by outlet and should be read as reported commentary rather than verbatim transcripts. Martina Navratilova reportedly suggested tournaments start scheduling her on bigger courts, rather than leaving her on outside one-sized for a lower-ranked player. Coco Gauff has spoken about the new fans she's bringing into the sport, fans who might not have followed tennis closely before. Novak Djokovic has called the demand around her a genuinely positive challenge for tournament organizers to solve, the rare problem in sports that everyone's happy to have. None of that happens around a player who's simply having a good season. That happens around a player who's changing who shows up to watch. Which brings us back to Washington, because on paper, this was already one of the deepest fields of the summer, with or without her. Venus Williams was there. So was Naomi Osaka, defending champion Leylah Fernandez, Alina Svitolina, Jessica Pegula, Zheng Qinwen, a lineup that in most years would be more than enough to sell out a tournament on its own. Any one of those names could headline a week like this. And yet, somehow, the story of the week kept circling back to a 21-year-old still climbing the rankings, not a former world number one or a Grand Slam champion. There was even a subplot brewing before the tournament started, a heavily promoted dream team pairing of Eala and Venus Williams in doubles, the kind of storyline built for highlight reels and pre-tournament features. But according to the finalized draw, that pairing never actually materialized. Reports instead had Venus repaired with Diana Schneider. It's worth holding both truths at once here. The anticipation was real, the promotion around it was real, even if the reality on paper didn't end up matching it. Sometimes the story fans build in their heads becomes its own kind of moment, whether or not it plays out exactly as advertised on court. What did materialize, fully and unmistakably, was the atmosphere. Organizers reportedly made last-minute adjustments, revised seating charts, expanded security, reworked fan access points, because demand had outpaced the original planning, forcing decisions to be made on the fly rather than months in advance. The William H. G. Fitzgerald Tennis Center reportedly filled with waves of Philippine flags and Team Eala shirts, with chanting starting before she'd even walked onto the court, building through the warm-up, and carrying through every changeover. Families reportedly traveled in from neighboring states, healthcare workers, engineers, students, longtime fans who'd never made the trip to D.C. before, specifically to be there for her matches, treating it less like a routine tennis outing and more like an occasion worth planning a trip around. And Eala herself reportedly described the strength of the Filipino community she found in Washington as something unlike anything she'd experienced on tour before, a comment that says more about the week than any ticket figure could. Strip away the prices and the sellout percentages for a second, and that's really the heart of it. A young athlete, thousands of miles from home, walking into what felt, by her own account, like a homecoming she didn't expect to find in the middle of an American summer. Zoom out far enough, and this stops being a story about one tournament, or even one season. Andy Roddick, speaking on his podcast, made the point that Eala isn't just riding a hot streak, she's building an entirely new segment of tennis fandom, and doing it faster than most athletes manage in a full career, let alone in 2 seasons. That tracks with what's been happening on the ground, tournament after tournament. Filipino-American communities across the U.S. turning tennis attendance into something closer to a cultural celebration than a typical sports outing, an event as much about identity and pride as it is about the match itself. By this point in the season, she becomes something more than a rising player in most conversations around the sport, a symbol, fairly or not, of the Philippines' growing footprint in international sport, spoken about in the same breath as the country's biggest athletic moment. And there's a business lesson buried in all of this too, one that extends well beyond her. Ticket pricing is one of the most honest signals a market can send about star power. Numbers don't get swept up in narrative the way headlines can, and tournaments are increasingly not waiting to react to her presence after the fact. They're actively planning around it, from court assignments to logistics, before the draw is even finalized. Whatever else Washington was, It was a real-time case study in how fast one breakout player can reshape the economics of attendance in an entire sport, and a reminder that box office and box score don't always move together. Sometimes one leads the other by months. So back to the question this all started with: has any player in recent memory generated this level of anticipation before playing a single match of a tournament? Based on everything the numbers and the reports suggest, the honest answer looks like no. Not as an absolute, unshakable claim, and not because every figure here has been independently verified beyond doubt, but as the clearest conclusion the evidence in front of us actually points to. And if Washington is any indication, this may be closer to the beginning of that story than the middle of it. The next question, the one worth coming back for, is what happens once the tennis itself actually starts, how she performs under the weight of all that anticipation, on the courts she helped fill, in front of the flags and the chants she helped bring out. But for now, before a single point is played, sit with a simpler image, a 21-year-old walking out in front of a crowd of strangers who feel, somehow, like home. That's not just a ticket price story, and it was never really about the numbers at all. That's what it looks like when a career turns a corner in real time, in front of the people who showed up to watch it happen. If you want to be here for whatever comes next in her story, stick around, there's a lot more of it still to be written.